Penguin Audio presents Wit's End by Joy Fowler. Read by Bernadette Dunne.
It seems only fair that I live with the people I've killed.
A.B. Early, Interview with Ms. Magazine, June 1983. Part 1. Chapter 1. 1. Miss Time was seated, with her feet on the floor and her head on the table. Her neck and back were stiff, but stiffness was her natural condition. Perhaps nothing should be made of this. The kitchen curtains were pulled. There were 2 glasses on the counter. One was empty, the other half so. A wine bottle, red, was beside the glasses. The cork was in the sink. A tiny clutch purse had fallen to the floor beside Miss Time's leg. Among the contents spilling out were a lipstick, keys, and a pair of reading glasses. Someone had written something on the tablecloth using a faint red ink, or maybe the wine. It might have been a phone number back from the days when phone numbers began with an exchange. A, D, and an A were clearly legible. Devonport 7-3, and then maybe a 5 or maybe a 2. Those numbers had spread, and the rest were fat and indistinct. The purse was the size of an aspirin. The lipstick slightly larger than a grain of rice. The kitchen floor about as big as a sheet of typing paper. Poor murdered Miss Time was only 3 inches tall. And the whole tableau was on the bedside table under the reading light where Rima would see it first thing every morning and last thing every night.
"I'll have Tilda move that tomorrow," Addison told her. "I guess you don't need it in your bedroom. I'm so used to it I don't even stop and think anymore how it looks to someone else."
Rima already knew about the dollhouses. Of course she did. They were as famous as Addison was. This was the way Addison outlined her mysteries, spending the first few months of each book making a meticulous replica of the murder scene, right down to its tiny clues and tiny gore.
"If I can just get the murder scene right," she told Ms. Magazine,
A.B. Early Thinks Small, an interview Rima kept for many years in her sock drawer and reread often,
"well, then the book practically writes itself."
The interview was accompanied by a picture of Addison making minute adjustments to a pin-sized bread knife. She'd aged since then, though not much. In her middle 60s now, she was too thin, but she'd always been too thin, all bone and sharp angles, as if she'd been made from coat hangers, deep-set eyes, and Eleanor Roosevelt's teeth.
"I got my first dollhouse when I was 4, she'd said, first in an interview with Ellery Queen, October 1985, and then in many interviews after. "And a few years later, a little man and woman to live in it, Mr. and Mrs. Brown. I hated the Browns the second I laid eyes on them. I loved the little furniture. The little people made my skin crawl. I didn't want anyone to live in it. I wanted it to be my house. Or maybe fairies, that you wouldn't ever see, but you'd pour milk into the thimble teacups, and when you came back later, the milk would be gone. So I rigged a noose from a rubber band and hanged Mr. Brown from the banister. Mother always said that was her first clue about me. He had a name, she always said, as if it wouldn't have been shocking at all if only I hadn't known his name. But there was something so creepy about little Mr. Brown. He wore a hat you couldn't take off." All A.B. Early books begin with a death. This one starts here, with Miss Time's plastic head on the table in the kitchen, on the nightstand, in the guest room of the old Victorian house on the cliff over Twin Lakes State Beach in Santa Cruz, California. The house was called Wit's End. It was a bed and breakfast, though with a different name, when Addison bought it, and before that it had been the final home of some woman who'd survived the Donner Party. Rima heard her father say that once to her mother. She was 5 at the time, and for months she'd anguished over this deadly party the Donners had given. Was it the punch? She became frightened of birthdays, a fear that had never completely gone away. Rima slept at Wit's End before she saw it.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?